I'm an owner of the group that's in the Cincinnati Reds, which is 18 years duration, and I'm also an owner of FC Cincinnati MLS team. And this is off point, but the Reds are currently in first place, and FC Cincinnati is currently in first place. But these things come and go. You know, that's just of the moment. In with respect to FC, I was the first investor and funded a small group of people in 2014 who put together a plan and made a deal to acquire rights from a group in the Netherlands that had the ability to build a minor league team in the USL, United Soccer League. And we entered the USL in about 2016 or so, performed at the top of the 30-member league, which helped prompt a fairly fast move into Major League Soccer, where we've been for about 3 years. And it's been an interesting experience in multiple ways, obviously in the context of valuations, which is one of the topics of potential interest. They've gone up substantially, and I believe a reasonable prognosis is that values will continue to go up. If I take the Reds as an example, by the way, I may have gone beyond my introduction.
Yeah, Jack, you're right. I should have asked for the short one. That's correct.
Let me play like I didn't say any of that. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio. I founded a venture firm 33 years ago called Blue Chip Venture Company. I also teach entrepreneurship at a law school in Cincinnati, and I have 4 children who live in different places, and I've now run out of time.
Yeah, I think that was about 2 minutes ago. Bob, go ahead.
Well, are you in control or not in control?
I was supposed to be.
I'm Bob Malandro, managing partner at Whitecap Sports Group out of Tampa, Florida. We are a sports M&A firm, and we specialize in putting investors into sports-related opportunities. That can mean a lot of different things. The industry is very diverse, but we're highly concentrated in ownership of major league sports teams, and even more specific in people that want to acquire stakes in major league sports teams. So LP, minority equity interest. And I would say over the last 2 years, we've done over 20 of those types of transactions across Major League Baseball, NBA, Major League Soccer, NFL, and we also do a fair amount of work in across minor leagues as well. And as you guys most certainly know, it's an active asset class. Every day you're reading about somebody's buying a team or a piece of a team, and we're just fortunate enough to be involved in a lot of those transactions.
Cool. And I'll have your names later. Matt, go ahead.
Matt Saur. I have run a strategic advisory boutique called Woolery Company. Also run a opportunistic private investment vehicle in lower middle market businesses. My advisory business, which most overlaps with this conversation, is focused on family and founder-led businesses, and principally, almost all of our business comes from very large families that we've done deals in and around the sports space, whether it's Big Four teams, esports, some of the new startup leagues, or technology around it. And we, a lot of times, we put together groups that will look at various assets in those spaces.
My name is Larry Botel. My day job is actually as a real estate investor. The company I have called Joss Realty Partners, which we buy office buildings around the country, which is another panel, or 3 or 4, I'm sure. But I guess I'm also the president of Alliance Sports, which I'll represent the minor league owners on the panel. But we were founded in 2008. A partner, Gary Green, and I started it. And to this day, we own 3 minor league baseball teams, a USL League One soccer team, and Baseball America magazine.
Okay, awesome. Now that we're not strangers anymore, as far as Scott might say, let's talk about the topic at hand. So Jack, I guess I'll start with you because you're actually representing the major leagues here. What's the rationale for a team owner to get involved as an investor, as an owner, specifically as a minority owner? For you, when you got into the Reds and Cincinnati FC, and just in general these days?
Oh, I think number one factor would be love. Number two would be fun. And number three would be long-term appreciation. The values of sports teams, we're talking about baseball, but it's true across the major leagues, particularly the four big ones of basketball, hockey, football, and five, soccer and baseball. Values have gone up substantially, and in our case, valuations of teams were about 2 times revenue in 2005 when we bought the Reds, and they've migrated up to, you and I were debating this, 5 to 9 times. And the Yankees are worth 7.1 billion according to Forbes, and that's around 10 or 11 times revenue. So let's say 10 is the upper limit on a revenue multiple. That was unheard of 18 years ago when we bought the Reds. The Reds, staying with that example, according to Forbes, the franchise is now worth 1.2 billion. We bought it for 270 million. Revenue the year before was 123 million. This year it looks like it'll be about 280 million. The average revenue size of a Major League Baseball team is $345 million per season. So there's some, it's lumpy. There's some biggies like the Yankees and Dodgers and Red Sox and Cubs, and then there are smaller markets. In our case, Cincinnati is, I think, the third smallest of the 30 baseball markets.
But it's a lovely place. I've been with Jack. So if you ever go to Cincinnati, look Jack up. It's worthwhile.
I have a question for Jack. I don't know how he teaches entrepreneurship to lawyers.
I think that's probably a topic for another panel.
Well, the starting point is they know nothing. Therefore, the process goes from there.
That is a very hard.
So as a segue here, we don't really have to debate what the valuations are because Bob, this is what you do every day. So what are you seeing in terms of valuations? Are they as consistent with what you're seeing from Forbes in terms of the increase? One, and then two, from your perspective, where is the upside these days? Or is there still room to grow in some of these highly, I guess you could say, inflated sports and franchises?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll answer the second one first. The answer is yes, of course, we're bullish on continued aggressive growth across Major League Sports, both in the US and abroad. And the reasons for that are really twofold. You're not going to really grow revenues in the traditional ways to justify those types of gains, right? It's only so many tickets you can sell. It's only so much you can price a ticket at. Same thing with merchandise and food and bev and things of that nature. Where the white space is on media rights, which continue to proliferate. Every time a new media rights deal is up for renewal, it is activated or shopped around at a huge bump. And then the second is, of course, this tsunami that's coming down the pike with sports wagering. Okay, so teams and leagues could never really monetize that in the past, even though sports betting has been a thing forever. Now there's about 20 or so states that have legalized sports betting. That's going to obviously grow significantly in the coming years, and that's a enormous revenue stream that's yet to be tapped into. And I think a lot of the valuations you see today are actually pre-baking in, the expectations both on media rights and sports betting. And let's not forget, they're intertwined, right? If people are actually engaging on the wagering side, that's creating, a desire to watch the games, go to the games, view the games. So that's going to bolster viewership numbers, which again, then those metrics will come to the table when it's time to renew the media rights deal. So that snowball, in our opinion, is the biggest justification for, increased valuations that you're seeing.
Just because it gets people to pay attention, what are some, for instances, of team deals that you can disclose that you've done recently?
Well, without getting into specifics, we've put a number of investors into New York Yankees over the last 2 years. We put investors.
I've heard of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
They play baseball, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, pretty famous brand. Chicago Cubs, Chicago Bulls, those are recent.
These are like secondary investors?
Yeah, these are, here's the thing is the ones that get all the publicity are like the Denver Broncos or the Mets, right? They want to sell the whole team, the Commanders
Right, so when the
recently.
franchise exchange.
You read about those every day. Well, there's a whole nother ecosystem involved where you have these investors that have, invested in these teams in some cases many years ago, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And now they're getting up there in age and they're getting to the point where they're doing estate planning and the assets worth significantly more than what they had originally invested. We had a guy who put in 250,000 into an NBA team in the mid 1980s, and we just got him out of the deal at 42 million. So, that's the reason they do it. But there's a whole ecosystem, a whole secondary market of these sellers. They aren't necessarily the team selling; it's their individual LPs that are looking to take money off the table very quietly. That's why you never read about
They
this.
quantify the size of this, and it's hard to quantify.
As far as how many people are doing these types of
What's the size
transactions.
of transactions annually? Like,
Because they're not publicized, it's non-public
it's private
information.
deals, yeah.
They're private deals. I mean, I could speak to the ones.
Yeah, I would talk to Bob offline is
Yeah.
the answer about that. A lot of them are going
That's a
through.
shame.
So Matt, I got segues for every panelist. This is part of my job. But for you, we talked about big transactions, a lot of the headline ones. You worked on a few not too long ago. Why don't you tell us, if you can, which ones those were, and just from your perspective as someone who advises families on sports assets, like what's the calculus from your perspective, and how do you evaluate it as someone who's part of, I guess, the advisory side of it?
Yeah, I mean, one that made big headlines was the David Tepper Panthers deal. And, I would say what Jack was saying is really the calculus and how people look at it. A lot of times the investor first comes from a fan standpoint. It doesn't always mean they're a fan of the team, but they're a fan of the sport and the league, and they want to be a part of that culture. And then you get down to kind of valuation, as we were talking about, and other hair around the deal. I think, frankly, the more interesting deals from my perspective, from kind of the other considerations, are these minority stakes, because you don't always get the same rights as the majority owner in those deals. And that's, I'm sure as you will attest, that's hotly negotiated. How many parking spaces are you listed in the program? How many tickets you get, access to the box?
Can I run the bases? Have you done that, Jack?
On the basis.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, there you go. So that's another perk.
In those deals, that matters way more than I think people realize. They've already, a lot of times, if you're looking at a sports asset, most of the time you've made your mind up that you want to be in professional sports in some way if you can afford it. And then it's the other stuff, it's the country club piece of it that matters more.
Okay.
Are there restrictions on ownership in the USA or any? I mean, it's a different
Each league has rules around
from a
it.
geographic point of view, or like, I know somebody from Saudi Arabia can't buy you can talk about that.
So to answer your question, Martin, specifically, all the big four majors, you have to get at least a 2/3 supermajority vote of all the existing owners to be part of the club.
Even for secondaries.
No, not for second.
Oh yeah,
Not
no,
for
well,
secondary.
not necessarily for
Only
secondary.
for change of control of the
Yeah,
franchise.
but
Right.
it's still the same process. So even somebody's buying 1% of the team still fills out, let's say, and if it's baseball, they're still filling out a Major League Baseball application. And the team itself has to bless the incoming owner, and the league itself has to bless the incoming owner. I don't think there's, other than certain non-friendly countries, I don't think there's any hard rules saying you can't invest if you're from a country, but they're going to do a really thorough background check to make sure they know where the money's originated. And
There's
make
also
sure-
there's also liquidity requirements. as
yeah,
well.
yeah.
So
There's a lot of requirements.
There's minimum liquidity requirements, and these days, and we'll talk about it, there's been institutional money that's come in the last few years, and there's limits on what they can do in terms of governance and how much of a stake they can have.
But foreign interest, though, is one of, let's say, 3 to 5 factors that are likely to continue to push values up, because there's a larger pool of people that are interested in and have, and aren't barred. They might be barred in the context of the process. And it's a complicated process. It's off-putting, it's subjective, and I guess it's a credit to you that you got those people in, because most clubs, in baseball, most clubs have a provision that's fundamentally arbitrary, where one person can decide yes or no, I like this individual and I'm willing to have them come in or not. And in some cases, there are locally imposed norms, I'll call them, whereby the person needs to have grown up someplace or lives a certain place,
Some sort of
or in our
affiliation.
case, have some connection with the Reds.
Well, and somehow they let you into the club, so that worked out.
He's wearing a red shirt.
Yeah,
Keep on going.
that makes us. But I wanted. Sorry, I'll pick up all these things, but I wanted to bring Larry into the conversation only to say, there are certain people that do it for vanity, and there's certain people that do it for business opportunity. Talk to us about minor league sports and how it's different from major league sports, and what your motivation was in getting in addition to just the operating business.
Yeah,
itself.
I mean, I think ultimately it couldn't be more different. I mean, think about AAA baseball, we'll use that as an example. The second best baseball in the world, there's no media dollars, there's no national sponsorships. The capital that's available to the business is basically horrendous. There's no lending. It's all basically high net worth money. And the revenue streams are driven 100% by people coming to the stadiums. We don't control the players, right? We don't control the managers. We don't basically control the on the field play. So the business has evolved to be effectively like cheap family entertainment, where you have a kids play area and you have dollar hot dog nights and you have dollar beer nights, things like that, to drive attendance and to drive revenue. The average minor league baseball team top line is probably $10 million. And it can range, from, I think the tops are probably 50-ish, and single A, short season teams, which actually don't exist anymore, but single A short season could do $3 or $4 million top line. So the range is pretty broad as to what you see in the business. But we went into it thinking and actually proving that you can actually make money. The three minor league baseball teams that we own, and again, we don't pay the players, which is kind of the key metric, make money. And the concept of getting into it was to effectively roll up enough of these to be able to move them into a more efficient capital structure, because you're bigger and better, and then maybe you can go public, or maybe you can get somebody to lend you more than 20% personally guaranteed. So those opportunities we were looking at. We also looked at the fact that there is no media dollars to the second best baseball in the world. We thought that would change. Really hasn't. Major League Baseball took us over a couple of years ago. Hopefully that'll be a driver to make it change. But the upside that you see in professional sports, there is drag along. Values have increased. There is now private equity money coming into the business, not as much as you would expect given the opportunity, but it's changing. And we hopefully it will continue to change.
So there's no equivalent of like NIL, like likeness, et cetera, where you're promoting
Major League Baseball.
3A players saying, hey, they're the next big thing in the majors, or
The
Florida.
we deal with this in the magazine too, but the major league teams control the players. They're under
Even the
contract.
images, right?
Oh,
Wow.
all of it. Managers, players, images, likenesses. We own our brand. Like Richmond Flying Squirrels. We own Flying Squirrels. We sell all the merch. We make all the money off of that. But the latest prospect who's playing at AA in Richmond, we can't monetize him at all because he's owned by the Giants.
Hey, you can have stakes in multiple franchises in the same league?
So you used to not be able to, but now you can, because Major League Baseball basically scrapped a lot of the rules. And there's a private equity company called Silver Lake, who I'm sure
Of course,
many people are familiar with,
Yep.
who have purchased, I think, 20 some teams in the last year and a half, investing, upwards of $250 million, and they're going long minor league baseball. But it's the first real, capital inflow like that to take place in the business. Not only that wasn't just a guy trying to roll up a couple teams like us, but was real private equity money who thinks there's upside in the business. So that,
You've got college softball and college baseball on ESPN, why not? I mean,
There you go, right? Well, as
yeah,
far as
no, I
security-
mean, that's part of the conundrum is that you sort of we're wedged into this media, black hole where they can't really figure out a way to get the platform and get our entertainment onto television. where people
It's
will
not
actually-
broadcast. You're not allowed to broadcast it?
No, we are. Oh, no, we can do whatever we want. And now Major League Baseball is trying to figure that out, and they can't get ESPN, CBS, NBC, anybody to say, here's money, go put it on television.
You don't think it would be better for you to divest from the major league?
We can't, no, because they run us, right? So when Major League Baseball took us over a couple of years ago, their threat was, we'll go do this ourselves, right? It's all about development. All they care about with us is developing players to play in Cincinnati. They don't care about the player playing in, Louisville, right? Who's Cincinnati Farm Club. They care about making sure they can develop players to put them on the field in Cincinnati.
So pardon the phrase, and I think we're being a little bit literal here, but we are getting a little inside baseball, quite literally. And I did see a hand down there. I wanted
Love
to
that people are
acknowledge it.
still interested in baseball.
Are you only talking about minor league? Because my question is conflict of interest, if you can invest in more than one team. So is that only minor? or
That's
can the
only
ma-
minor. Yeah, I don't
Okay.
know. I
And
think
is
the
it
rules in
not a-
MLB that you can't have
Can't.
multiple
Can I-
ownership.
Cannot,
Not in major league,
Major League, yeah. Can't,
but is
you
it
know,
not a conflict of interest in minors?
We don't control the play. We don't do anything. We can't control the on the
plumbing.
field. We have absolutely no control over the guy, who's on the field, who's managing them, the decisions that are made day to day. We have no control of the standings.
The benefit of that is they're money machines. They just crank out money.
Try.
No, I get it, but now I'm thinking back to the baseball scandals of 100 years ago, where if you're an owner in two teams, you could be betting against
Yeah, now
one
you
or
can't.
trying to
We don't
affect it.
control. But I mean,
Okay.
like, just to take the, a question for a second, because it involves what you guys have been talking about. What's interesting to me is that there is a lot more high net worth capital that is willing to be a very limited partner in, whatever team, the Reds. Negotiate their parking space,
Yeah.
negotiate maybe 30% off merch, whatever it is. Then because they could take that same amount of money and be the man in Louisville, which is now for sale for $45 million.
Yeah.
Like, why hasn't there been that capital transition where somebody says, oh, I'd rather do this?
Well,
versus
first of all, Larry, I
just
want to thank you for
take a
doing my
back
job,
seat.
for me. I appreciate that. And I think that's probably a good question for Matt and then for Bob. I'm directing.
Yeah, from what I've seen it's a lot of times those guys don't want to operate it. That's where it really boils down to is they don't want to operate it and they're doing it for other reasons just than driving capital. If you look at the value proposition is different, right? That's a different type of investor that you have there. And I do think there's going to be potentially, if Silver Lake's bet goes well, there may be more funds that look at it from a roll-up opportunity or families that look at it from a roll-up opportunity. I know of a few that have looked at it from that perspective. I think we're still early on that is being a viable, solution for them from what they're trying to do and whatever family office strategy they have.
Makes sense.
Are there like sports banker magazines or periodicals that sort of that tell you, or sports economics that are out there? Are there any
There's kind of like
economists who focus on sports?
there's kind of like newsletters. There's different like reports that you can get digitally that tells you what's going on in the industry, and then there's publications like Sports Business Journal, which does spend a lot of time focusing on transactions and some of the movement in that space of the industry. So, but nothing I don't think as formal as you're asking.
I mean, there's like a wine economist network, right?
Yeah.
According to the sports economist network.
There's a podcast, there's a sports ownership podcast, maybe more than one actually out there, but it's really more like in that medium than like a hard copy magazine.
Yeah, half the battle is being tapped in. So fortunately for you guys, I brought all these people to get tapped in. So I want to talk about some fun things. Because part of the battle here is having fun. Jack, you were in venture capital. Larry, you were in real estate. And Bob and Matt, you can speak to this from the people that you advise and work with. What's the difference between those businesses and running a sports team's operationally? What were the things that you were surprised by or didn't anticipate for before you bought your stakes and after you got it?
Go ahead.
I mean,
have to
I
think.
was a real estate professional for 25 years. It's kind of all I knew before going into the sports business. It's completely different. It's an operating business. And when you look at minor league, on the minor league level, it's really a mom and pop operating business. And you're blocking and tackling and trying to get, literally the store on the corner to give you $2,000 for a sponsorship. So going from, let's say operating a building where you have a manager and a leasing agent and a cleaning staff and some maintenance people to what effectively is an entire operation where we have 40 or 50 people, running a real business in a local market was a complete change.
When you buy the franchise, do you own the stadium too, or?
More often than not, no. But there are franchises that own their stadium, but typically the municipality owns it and you lease it for a long term. So, but you're responsible for it. So you are running the building as well. So that was my biggest sort of, changeover.
I'll just chime in a little bit. One thing I learned early on when I started doing these types of transactions is anyone who has the resources to acquire a minor league baseball team or a piece of a major league baseball team, let's say they have 10, 20, $30 million, you can make a couple assumptions. One is they're probably bright people that were successful doing something else. They made that money in another business in all likelihood. And what they learn, basically when they move into this realm, is that it's a whole different world. Just because you made money in manufacturing does not mean you can own and run a minor league hockey team. As a matter of fact, I've seen people do that really badly. And that briefly is to the point you asked earlier, or you had brought up, why would somebody not want to own a minor league team versus a piece of a major league team? It's because one size doesn't fit all. Some people don't want to take that risk. Some people just want to, they feel like they can, the team will, pick the major league team will be a good steward of that money. They'll grow the business, the asset will appreciate, and they'll have some fun along the way. The alternative is, does the person really want to roll up their sleeves and figure out how to make this business work? And some people love that. I've never had a minor league team that I couldn't sell. I mean, we sell them all the time. There's many people that want to do that. As a matter of fact, dream about doing that, owning a baseball team or a hockey team, but not everybody.
I think it's a difference. Most of the people on this call and in the room are investors versus operators.
Yep.
So when we were investors, but we relied on people that knew what they were doing, that be the operators. We didn't think we could do it.
I think at the major league level, there is a consideration that professionalization has just really gotten so much superior than it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago. I mean, I run into ex-pro athletes at pickleball courts in Fort Lauderdale, Florida all the time. And I say that when people were pro athletes in the 70s, they had summer jobs, right? I mean, that was the old saying for the Dolphins, was that Mercury Morse was picking trash in 1970. His summer job was he was a sanitation worker. And I mean, so it seems like professionalization. Can you talk towards professionalization?
By the way, as an aside, pickleball is definitely on my bingo board. Every time I do one of these, pickleball has to come up at least once. So if you had it, I hope you got bingo. Jack, go ahead.
I did want to throw it in there just as an accident.
Are female franchises like WNBA beginning to get some traction?
Let's put a pin in that because I know you're doing the long wind up here.
Well, fortunately, you gave me enough time to think of the answer. From a venture capital standpoint, the firm I founded 33 years ago has invested in 210 companies over the course of 33 years, obviously. And there's one characteristic of my baseball investment that's different from all of the others, which is the baseball investment has gone steadily up and goes up irrespective of performance. On-field performance is not a determinant of value. And in the other 210, it was real life. Some worked, some didn't, some were problems, on and on and on and on. But, this is steadily up. Now, one of the problems with steadily up that's different from the smart place that, you and your colleagues are, is if, when we make money, and this is true of virtually all the clubs, it goes, in our case, it goes 100% into player payroll. We set it aside in order to be able to pay or bring in players that cost more. So the whole player payroll component in Major League Baseball is a factor in decision-making, which also essentially eliminates distributing capital. So that, back to my third point about, long-term appreciation, you can make money ultimately if and when it's sold, but you don't, in most cases, you don't make money along the way. Yankees might be a little different because there is so much money floating around. There's another issue too that has to do with major markets, smaller markets, and the unfairness of it. But I don't know if that's a topic for this
It just,
discussion.
if you can survive, the brand value, it just is astronomical. As the longer you survive, this brand value just goes through the roof.
But whereas we put money into player payroll, you don't. I mean, you just keep it. You just hand it out.
So it cash flows.
Yeah, cash flows. The baseball team's cash flow. Now, they unionize, right? The minor league players this year. MLB controls us now. So we're sort of waiting. There'll be a next shoe to drop. We're pretty sure that we're gonna have to start contributing, to that. But for now, we don't pay the players and we make money.
That sounds like a pretty good one-line sell. We don't play the players, and we make money, minor league baseball. So there was a question asked that I kind of want to use as a segue, which is basically, you asked about women's sports as a for instance seeing opportunity. I just wanted to zoom out a little bit and ask where the opportunities are outside of the big four majors that people aren't necessarily thinking about. And Matt, I'm looking at you, which might not be the wheelhouse question for you, but I'm looking at you just to get us kicked off and get you back into the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think women's sports is one of them. And I think you've seen a lot of capital in the last even 2 years flow into that space pretty significantly. And there seems to be a lot of, when you talk about private equity, I know of at least 5 or 6 women-led private equity firms or venture firms that have formed with part of their thesis being, we're going to support women's sports or the ecosystem around it. And, I think anytime you talk about opportunity, you always look for the less mature spaces. And I think that's definitely one of them. I think that, just a different kind of sport. I think there's probably some white space around some of these fast growing sports, whether it be like a racing, like an F1 or Formula E space that I know, Dan, you and I have talked about, or
that's also on the bingo card.
Or in the sailing space. And you look at some of the stuff that's going on in that space. I think those are ones where it's still, there's a lot of white space to go. And that's where I would be if I had capital to put into there. I would be putting into those places.
Bob, where are you seeing the money move? Because you're sort of the intermediary.
Yeah, I mean, I agree on the racing. I mean, we've been seeing that for a number of years now. There's a tremendous amount of growth, or I should say, accelerated interest in investing.
No
racing.
pun intended with racing. Accelerated interest.
Sorry.
Yeah, that was a good
Good
one.
catch. Good catch. Subliminal. But women's sports for sure, without question. And we've seen not only has it grown kind of steadily over the last couple of years, but even in the last couple of months, we have seen an influx of capital into women's sports, specifically into women's soccer. We're working on an NWSL opportunity right now that we were really pleasantly surprised at the amount of investor interest in that sport. And so I think that's got sustainability. I think the economics work. To Matt's point, there's still a lot of white space there, a lot of room to grow. And I think it checks a lot of boxes, for investors, because I think people are coming, it's the chicken or the egg. We were talking about this before. Do women's sports need the money in order to get to the level where they're competing economically with men's sports? I think people feel like the answer is yes, and they're willing to make those investments to grow those businesses.
Is the value of women's sports driven by the individual franchise? I mean, you look at these pro tennis players, and they make so much more money from branding than they make from competing, right?
Yeah.
And then you see these basketball players from here to Miami who, had NIL and they were making millions of dollars a year, right? I mean, can you talk towards that?
Well, I mean, those revenues don't necessarily flow through the teams and add to those teams' valuations. I think the valuations of the teams are going to be mostly driven by the strength of the league and the markets that those teams play in and how well they perform in those markets. Okay, so if you take NWSL or WNBA, for instance, and USL, as Larry certainly knows, is starting a women's league up very soon. It's going to depend on how well those markets perform. And that's going to be what determines whether those teams are worth X or Y. Even in NWSL, 5 years ago, you could have bought a team probably for $3 million, $4 million. And now valuations are in the 50, 60 or even higher range. They have really spiked.
I do think to that point, though, that helps, obviously, with eyeballs. I mean, my brother's a women's college basketball coach, and, yes, the revenues don't flow up that way, but there are a whole lot more people that watch and talk about it now with the two sisters down in Miami that are out there. And there are other examples besides them.
Yeah, I think they bring people, and also I think when it comes to women's basketball, the product has just improved dramatically.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right. So.
May I assume it's also a non-correlated asset?
To the markets?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's another benefit of what I have this conversation almost every day. And no one's ever bought a Major League Baseball team and sold it for less, or an NBA team or an NFL team ever. Okay. And that's in spite of inflation and pandemics and just every economic
Sexual assault allegations.
yeah, whatever the case may be.
All
They
right,
just
well,
keep going up.
now we turned up the heat in this room.
So they're unrelated to interest rates or any of that.
I want to just jump in before Mark asks the question, but quick consideration. Do you guys consider the demographics of the fans when you're investing or acquiring? A great example is the US Open tennis. About 60% of the paying fans who actually attend are women, right? So, I mean, and actually for tennis, that's why all the majors have equal pay for women, even when less people watch it.
Yep.
All the fans are women, most of the fans are women.
I'll jump in real quick because I think it'll tee up the segue, which is if you look at certain sports, their demos are actually wildly different from others. So let's look at Major League Baseball, for example. And Jack, you've heard me rail about this before, but can anyone guess what the average age of a Major League Baseball fan is?
100?
100. Okay, that's a good one. 58. 58, yeah, 58, 59, 60, right in that ballpark. No pun intended. So and that varies dramatically from something like esports, for example. Yeah. And so I'm not necessarily asking you to respond to that, but it is.
But I do think it goes into some of the things we hit on earlier about the ancillary businesses and revenue streams that you can tap on when you have a demographic like esports has that's digitally native, younger. You can do different things with that audience and monetize them in different ways than you can with a Major League Baseball fan that's average age 60 years old.
We have about 5 to 10 minutes. John Medina's already logged in, so I got it.
No worries.
Keep on going.
I was gonna let this hang in there.
I think Mark had a question.
I did, but actually you asked it and he elaborated on it, so it was perfect. Thank you.
One of my question was, how does Philadelphia keeps on winning in all sports? The franchises aren't going through the roof, but New York keeps on losing and everything. The franchise behind.
So Larry's the guy. He might be able to speak to that, but I did see a hand in the back from Howard.
I think it's in the air and water.
Dan asked before about ancillary sports besides women's. There are other sports out there, and I was just curious because it doesn't fit my demographic, but I happen to follow combat sports. I mean, the leagues are just like exploding. Is that something that people are getting involved?
Porque sí, yo las saco porque no quiero que estén allá.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think whatever that person's saying was responsive.
That was a comment.
So combat sports is just defined terms here. We're talking like boxing. We're talking MMA. Yeah, we're not talking about war as a sport.
Most dangerous game.
Yeah,
I would watch that.
Not actual. We're talking literal hand to hand combat. No, heavy munitions.
You can do that to Ukraine.
Okay, all right, we'll leave that one hanging out there. That said, I don't know if anyone had a response to that specifically.
I think it's already huge.
Yeah.
I think it's been growing, over the last 10, 15, 20 years.
Are there investment opportunities there?
Are there investment opportunities there? The last one that I thought was kind of fairly open, but got subscribed pretty quick was the PFC, the Professional Fighters Club. That was a great, I thought that was a success story. But now I wouldn't say, it is kind of a crowded space. There's a lot of success stories in combat sports right now. But it also, that type of thing breeds a lot of, people that want to jump in, and kind of, ride those coattails. So for every one of those success stories, there's 3 or 4 people that have tried and failed to, kind of carve out their own little niche there.
Yeah, there's a lot of people I know that are looking around the boxing space because they've had some trouble on that side with the proliferation of UFC and mixed martial arts. But maybe Dana White will open up the slap league or whatever that thing's called.
Yeah,
some investment.
which is ironic if you Google what happened with him, but it's probably a topic for another day. The combat sports thing is so interesting to me. If Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg do actually fight, that would probably be the moment I would get in. That pay-per-view would go through the roof. I know we only have a couple minutes left, so I kind of wanted to wrap up with.
I did have a question on Live Tour.
Sure.
Is that the smartest thing ever, or
From whose side?
from the Saudi side?
Maybe from the players that joined.
And the players that
I think they feel good about their decision. So they got all the benefits, and now they get folded right back.
Are there other
into
opportunities like that you see maybe out there, like a Live Tour?
Well, there are. Tiger Woods and Rory McIlroy started a golf league where you can actually buy teams in that league, and people have been doing that. There are definitely some golf-oriented investment
The
opportunities.
PIF is going to go after tennis now.
Yeah.
That's
Smartest
pretty
thing
well
ever.
documented.
Yeah, I'm like, well, this could happen in golf, why not do it in tennis?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of irony in that because they filed an antitrust suit against PGA claiming that they were a monopsony, and then they just became a monopoly again. So go figure. Anyway, I saw a hand up.
Well, I just thought I'd put it in perspective a little bit. My father was a quarterback back in the 30s, made $35 a game.
Oh,
Which team?
What?
Which team?
In Baltimore.
I think that's about how much they pay me to play quarterback still in today, even accounting. Listen. Hey, the one thing that I think is probably the one question I think is worth asking to wrap this up is outside of franchise ownership. If you're thinking about being like a picks and axes business or catering to Major League Sports or professional sports in general, what kind of opportunities are out there? What do those look like? And if we can get specific. And considering you're nodding along, Bob, I think you probably have an answer to the tip of your talk.
No, I would say they're probably technology oriented, anything in and around sports technology, wearable technology, and things of that nature. There's definitely a lot of interest in the investment community. So if you're going to boil it down to a very, a simple answer, I would point it in that direction.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. Technology supporting the betting space is another one. That's where I would put my money.
I think you can also consider those areas in the context of publicly traded securities. The growth of sports is touching certain factors. Obviously, FanDuel and DraftKings or whatever are examples of public securities that touch betting. But big tech might be this might be a thought. Big tech is the big idea that's driving sports, whether it's generating data or it could be, take Apple as an example, and globalization is another factor. But there are 1.2 billion iPhones in the world out of the 8 billion people, and MLS, all MLS games of all 30 or all 29 teams is being shown, or they're being streamed worldwide on Apple, and Apple has a 10-year deal that was just consummated and implemented this season. So for 10 years, the world is going to see MLS, and the world happens to be populated by soccer zealots. So globalization, big tech, media growth, although it'll be new media, not old media, streamers. And there's some predictions that Netflix will step in and trump them all and take it away from Apple and others. So there's some pretty dynamic changes that are being driven by betting, by technology, and by an increasingly global audience.
So I don't know how you follow that up, Larry, but if you wanted to, I'll give you a shot.
Well, I'll go back. Look, I still think there is opportunity in minor league sports. And it's just to me, as a finance person, the cost of capital, major league sports is literally zero. It's probably the last place where the cost of capital is zero now. And then in minor league sports, it's still, it's completely inefficient. So I still think that difference, that gap needs to close somehow. And I think Silver Lake's starting to figure it out first, and there'll be more.
Yeah, well, I think with that, we'll wrap it up. I'd say give it up for these guys.